Back in the late 70s and lasting about through the mid 80s, there was a new manufacturer on the model railroad scene that introduced quite a few new affordable products in a relatively short time. And I just happen to have about as close as I'll ever be able to get to a brand new model from them, and that is the Pemco ALCO C-430. So in this video, I'll be looking into the history of this model as well as Pemco, giving it a full tune-up, as well as a full review. Looking into the history of Pemco, I'm mainly going by what's in the HO Scale Trains Collector's Resource, as well as some information from various forums. And it looks like they were started in the late 70s, maybe about 79, by former employees of Tyco, both from the business and factory ends. And they were potentially using funds that were illegally taken from Tyco instead of sourcing their own legal funding. And in a very short period of time, they developed a large number of models, mostly by copying the other manufactured models that were already out there. If you look through their catalog, just for the engines, you can find a base for just about everything they made. The ALCO C-430 here was copied from the Tyco C-430. The SD-35 was directly copied from the Atlas Roco SD-35, which is very easy to tell by the incorrectly modeled right side handrail. The F40PH was copied from Lifelike's F40. The GG1 from Rivarossi's GG1. The 260, it appears, was copied from a Fujiyama Brass 260. The 040 Dockside was copied directly from Rivarossi's. And then their F9 was kind of a mashup of about 3 different models, with the chassis and roof area coming from the Tyco F unit. The sides were copied mostly from the Atlas FP7 and then shortened to fit the length needed. And then it looks like the nose of it was copied from the ATT American Train and Track F9, which was also sold later by Model Power and Lifelike. The only one that I can't find a base for is the 482, but I wouldn't be surprised if they did a bit of copying there from other models. I just haven't found one. And then as for the freight cars, I haven't looked in depth into them, but I wouldn't be surprised if they were also copied. Due to all that and their sourcing of their funds, it wasn't long before they ran into legal trouble, and because they developed so many models so quickly, they used up all their funding and very quickly went into bankruptcy. So by the early 80s, their tooling had to be sold off, and pretty much all of it went to Mahano to be repurposed into models that were sold by AHM, IHC, and Model Power, some of which are actually still in production and available directly from Mahano. So if nothing else, the tooling developed by Pemco has at least gotten a decently long lifespan. Now to start off with the model, I'll just pull it out of the packaging here. Pemco had, honestly, a pretty nice looking box with the black and the gold trim on it. It's really a pretty attractive design, so I think they did well there. The model itself comes in a nice plastic tray. It's pretty thin, but at the same time it's supportive. It's better than some others I've seen. Underneath that you get the paper manual. This one here is about as close to brand new as you'll ever get. A little bit of yellowing with age, of course, but still really excellent condition. So there's all their paperwork, instructions for tuning up and disassembly, anything else you may need to do to keep it running. And now pulling the model out of the tray. The tray is flexible enough that it's easy to get a good grip on the model. And there it is. And that really looks pretty nice. I mean, it's got some glaring inaccuracies for detail, like the painting here. Just most obvious thing that jumped out to me right away is for this blue freight war bonnet, they just put the point right up to the front there. I've never seen any other blue Santa Fe freight diesel like this have that point coming up on the cab. Normally it's just these yellow bits on the side, and then it's blue going back there, and then yellow going back to there. So from the side, it looks pretty accurate. Once you look at the top, it's like, wow, where did that come from? See, it looks like the coupler's broken on here. Oh well, horn hook coupler. I don't care about those too much. Everything else looks like it's in really great shape. I don't see any breaks or damage anywhere. So let's get some close-ups of this thing, how about? Starting off with the cab, you can see that it's a nice clean molding. They did a pretty good job with some of the details here and there, like the window frames are clearly outlined, as well as the door frames. So those look really nice. The horns are these chunky pieces of plastic, which are copied from the Mantua Tyco version. And you'll also see that the open pilot is a direct copy of Tyco's with that same shaped lift bar detail there, as well as the MU hose plugs. So yeah, that's direct copying right there. One unique thing they did add was the tread on the walkways. You didn't have that on the Tyco version. And they also made these steps full squares instead of kind of cutting them off at an angle this way. So there are a few little unique bits here and there. You can also see that they made it so that the window frames were individually molded within the main window, which is nice. But they did also position the window a little bit too low, so compared to other models, it ends up looking a little odd in that area. So that's a little unfortunate thing there. If they just put that a little higher, the cab would have looked quite a bit better, in my opinion, and probably the opinions of quite a few others too who have seen this. Moving on to the hood area. This is also nicely molded, sharply done, very clean, but this is probably the most copied from the Mantua Tyco model. You can see that some of the ventilation here, around here, other areas, looks basically one for one. You could, if you put these next to the Mantua Tyco model, you could almost not tell them apart at all until you looked at the front and back of the model. So yeah, that's a carbon copy area. Although they did put the walkway tread in, so that's nice. Now going around to the back, they did put a little more effort into this area. You'll see that it has more detailed ventilation up here where the Tyco model had pretty much nothing at all. And on top of that, this ventilation is completely see-through and very finely molded. So that's a nice detail right there. They did a good job on that. They also made the side vent see-through. So that looks pretty nice. Or is that see-through? Ah, yeah. Okay, yeah, that's see-through. I just had to get a little light shining through there, so that helps it to look that much better. Going around to the back though, it goes back to copying Tyco, so everything down to the shape and little bits of the grab irons is identical. They did turn the headlight lenses into actual clear parts instead of just molding that solid. So that's a little improvement. Nothing underneath this pilot like there is on the front, so that's just a really big opening. But yeah, it's mostly copied, but they did put a few little nice details here and there with the see-through ventilation and their walkway treading. Right side of the model, more of the same, finely molded, looks good overall. And just for comparison's sake, let's put this Tyco model in there. So just going over that, you can see some of the things I pointed out, such as the vent there being a copy, ventilation around here, that molding ring around this, all copied over, ventilation here, most of the cab shape copied, while they did their little bits here and there to help it stand out just a little bit. Now if there's one thing that they really did a lot better than Tyco, it's the trucks. These are much more realistically sized. They look a lot better as a result. And these are finely molded, pretty nicely detailed for the day. But then go to the fuel tank, and they copied the most unfortunate part of the Tyco C-430, which is this strangely shaped skirt behind the miniature fuel tank, which you would never see on any prototype that I have come across. I mean, if anyone knows of a prototype that has this shape of a fuel tank, you can let me know. But as far as I know, this is really about as strange and unrealistic as you can get. And then that tiny fuel tank there, I don't know what they were thinking. I also want to get a close-up of the paint quality here. So you can see that the colors are nicely coated and very opaque, but they did also make some mistakes, like the back of the cab is blue instead of yellow like it should be, and then like I pointed out earlier, it's got that blue stripe going across it, which shouldn't be there. And the separation between colors, you can see it's pretty fuzzy in a few areas. So I mean, in the late 70s, even Atlas had this problem, so it was hard to find really good ready to run paint back then. The printing of the lettering looks good, very clear, water, fuel right there, so that looks nice, even if these letters are maybe a little oversized. And then over here, the S didn't quite get into the full ventilation there, but beyond that, and the bit of shine that these letters have to them over the rest of the paint, I think the printed lettering looks pretty good on here, especially for a cheap model of the day. And just a quick look at the underside there. You can see the exposed gearing as well as the half plastic, half metal wheels. And detail-wise, this will not be competing with Rapido anytime soon. So I think that's about all we need to look at for the detail portion. Overall, for a toy model of the day, it's not bad, but it does have some glaring inaccuracies to it that could definitely bother the scale modelers. Now, before we take this to the track for any testing, let's get it to the workbench and give it a good tear down and tune up. So here it is on the workbench. So let's see just how they built these things. Looks like it's just got some latches around the side in the same locations that you'd find them on a Tyco, pretty much. Yeah, it's popping off easily enough. Don't need any special tools for that. But you do want to start at the end, then work your way in. Okay, just about, okay, there it goes. And yeah, come up off the back, move forward off of that coupler mount, and all right, so the headlight inside, they copied Tyco's method of mounting with a pin in there and then just a strap coming off of there. Looks like it's got a diode and a directional lighting too. So that's kind of nice. A little more than I expected, actually. Then there's the powered truck. And from the look of it, this is also kind of a copy design from what I can tell. I'd say it's based heavily on the Lima drive trucks. So it's not just the shells they were copying, they were going right down to the mechanisms themselves. Let's see, this will be easier to work on if I undo these wires. But first, looks like what I need to do is unscrew this retainer here. Take that off. Okay. Yes, so with that out, looks like the truck just drops out. Yeah. Yeah, the headlight soldered onto those two contacts. Two. Okay. I'll reconnect that later. Oh, that's interesting. They ran out of wire partway through and just spliced one onto there. Well, it works. There's nothing for it to really short out with either, so okay. Anyway, let's get that out of there. So there's the Pemco drive truck. Turns nice and freely. There's a little crack on top of there, so it looks like the plastic shrunk around the ring magnet inside. That shouldn't affect the running quality though. Yeah, you can actually see the ring magnet right in there. Well, actually it's not a full ring. It looks like it's just two pieces that come around like that, and they have a spring clip in the top of there. And the bottom cover, looks like it's just those two screws holding it on. Lift that off. So there's the electrical contact. It's a plate inside that touches against the axles. I'm guessing there's really not much need to go in this deep in this case, but I haven't worked on a Pemco drive before, so I'm more just curious about what all is inside of here. And there's a little bit of old grease on there anyway, so might as well clean it up a little bit. Okay. And then the brush plate here, looks like it's just these two screws. Okay. So the brush material looks like it's pretty good quality. Doesn't have the look of the cheaper carbon. Got both springs there. And the armature design, there. This almost looks the same as a Bachmann or Lifelike armature. It's a little thicker than the ones you get on a Tyco model. Just wipe off a little bit of that oxidation there. Let's brush the gear out. And it's nice to see that it's a metal gear. I was actually kind of expecting it to be plastic. I feel a little bit of stiff movement in here, so the oil or grease is definitely kind of dried up inside. Looks like that's just a pin holding the large gear in. Oh, yeah. That pin just pulls right out. Okay. So that's actually pretty easy. The two gears there, just on their little plastic pins. So there you go, the full disassembly of a Pemco drive truck. So I'll just wipe down these gears a little bit. There's not much oil or grease on them, but just enough to kind of gunk things up slightly since it did dry out. And the geared axles here are made very similar to Tyco's, with the gear being molded directly onto the plastic wheel. Get that little bit of grease off of there. As for the tires, actually they feel like they're still in good condition. They've got a little bit of grip to them, so no need to replace those. Yeah, so these are in really nice shape. Seems like the quality of the parts is pretty good. Drop of fresh oil in each bearing. Those feel like they're turning nice and free now. Drop there too. There is a small washer inside of there, so I want to make sure that's in place. Yeah. And let's see. Yeah, it looks like I'll just have to drop the springs and brushes into here and then line things up while I push it back onto the main body. Okay, that should all be in place where it needs to be. And yeah, that crack at the top definitely won't affect operation. Not like when the Bachmann trucks crack and then the screws don't even hold them together. Feels like everything's turning nicely. So let's try powering that up. It actually has a pretty low starting voltage. It's only about 2 volts right there. Oops, forgot to add oil to the bearings. Okay, let's try that again. It's not the best sounding motor. A lot of that noise is coming from vibration. That armature is really not well balanced. Seems like it's got plenty of torque though. Okay. So even if it's a little noisy, things are looking promising. Let's go around this way with that tab facing upwards. Oh, that's nice. They didn't get that properly soldered. It's a cold joint. Well, I can fix that real quick. That'll hold. Put a little fresh flux on there, and the solder flows a lot better. Let's brush it off a little bit, and put that back in. Drop in the wheels. Got plenty of tension on them from the pickup strap. So I think I'll oil both sides there as well as the middle, just to make sure things are working as smoothly as possible. And there's that. And there's that. Okay, now we need a little grease in those gears. Okay, I think that'll be enough. Yeah, that's plenty. Wipe away that excess now. Okay, it's looking ready to run. Yeah, it still has a good low starting voltage too. Got that back in. And let's see. No reason to remove this truck, but those wheels are rolling really stiff, so I will at least take it apart, clean them up a little. And of course this is the same kind of assembly with 2 screws. Actually, some of the stiff rolling might have come from how much pressure these contacts are putting on the wheels. So I might actually bend these back just a little bit. Yeah, it seems like it was actually just the pressure from the contacts. So there's really little to no grease at all on these wheels. Yeah, this will help. So you can see that there's just enough there that they will still have plenty of contact with the axles. They just won't be pressing super hard against them. As long as they're making good contact, that's all they need. There, that's a lot better. Now, before I put the shell on and resolder the lights, let's just make sure that this is running as well as I hope it does. And those tires definitely have a good amount of traction to them. Whoa. Hello. It's got a sudden short circuit there. Oh. Nothing at all. Mechanism's fine. There's a stray drill bit contacting both of the rails. Yeah, that looks good. It's actually going to be a pretty nice runner, I think. Put that back into there. Okay. And before I put that retainer back in, I better make sure I got those headlight wires on the correct sides. Yep. Okay. There, and that's all reassembled. I also just noticed that if you look down close in there, there's just a tiny hole below the screw, and that lines up with the motor bearing, so you can actually add oil to this without taking the whole motor apart. Okay, snap that back on. Square pins, so you can't just push it down. You have to spread the sides of the body. Almost there. These last two are being a little bit stubborn. There we go. Okay. Now just one last thing. These of course have the same coupler design as all the other train set Talgo trucks of the day. So just have to spread that pin out of there so I can get that broken coupler out of the pocket. It's a little harder to take out when they're broken, but they do come out eventually. And this, of course, isn't a Pemco coupler, but it should work perfectly fine. Oh yeah, that's all good. Okay, so that is now all finished. And now that's ready to run on the layout. let's see how it does. Should go off pretty smoothly. Not exactly the quietest runner. Let's get that up to full speed, see what that looks like. Pretty fast. According to my speed controller, that's going 140 scale miles per hour, and actually it seems like it's speeding up even more as things kind of settle in, so that may even be hitting about 150 scale miles per hour now. This is definitely not geared for slow speeds at higher voltage. It's actually pretty steady at the lower end though. A lot better than you'd usually expect from these pancake drive motors. Let's see how it does going backwards. It seems like the running quality is consistent in both directions. Sometimes you don't get that. It can be slower or rougher in one direction and then perfectly smooth in the other. So it seems like this is actually pretty well engineered overall, at least for a less expensive model. So honestly, I'm pretty impressed with this. It's, I mean, with all their copying and cost cutting and everything, the running quality is actually pretty decent. After some low speed tests, about the slowest I've been able to maintain for any length of time is 7 scale miles per hour. And that's at just over 3 volts. Gets a little picky about where it sustains that speed though, so on a switch like this, doesn't really want to do it. I think a lot of that comes down to the fact that it's geared pretty high and it's a little 3-pole pancake motor, so the slow speed's never going to be that good, even with perfect cleaning and tuning. It's just kind of the way that it's designed. For regular running though, it's nice and smooth. And as for current draw, when it's running free like this, it's only drawing about maybe 0.1 to 0.15 amps depending on the speed. And I wouldn't be surprised if about a third of that at least is coming from the light bulb. So it's an efficient runner, definitely. And as for the stall current, it's only about 0.45, maximum half amp at 12 volts. And to stall it, I was just holding it down to the track. And of course the tires were helping out a little bit too. But I still felt quite a bit of push from the motor to want to get it moving, so it's not a weak engine. Even with the higher speed gearing, it's actually got a fair amount of torque to it. Now let's see what happens with the switch. You can see that spot. Lost power for a moment, but I think that's just because of my track. I haven't cleaned the inner loop for a little while. And it handled the other side fine too. Now let's see how it does pulling some cars. Coupled onto that one just fine. I've got a string of 15 box cars here, all free rolling. Takes off just fine. Still running efficiently too. It only added maybe about 20 milliamps total to the current draw running at this speed. It really has no problem at all speeding up with the whole load behind it. Although since it does have all the weight kind of focused around here, and it's just the two traction tires on the side there, if you kick it too hard, it could potentially cause a derailment, so you do want to speed it up gently when there's any load behind it. But once you get it going, it has no problem at all keeping that load moving behind it. Let's add a few more and see how it does. Alright, so this time I've got 28 cars hooked up to it. Let's see how that does. Still takes off just fine, no loss of traction, but the motor definitely did have to work harder to do that. So it can definitely still pull a load like this, it's just more strain on the motor. And I don't think you'd want to be hauling this kind of a load up a grade. So maybe the ideal number of cars for one of these engines would be maybe about 15, 20 at the most. I think that's a reasonable number. So there you go. Fully tuned up and working as well as possible. These are not bad runners at all. So that's the Pemco ALCO C-430. Overall, it's really not a bad model for the price point that it was made to be in, which was a bit above Tyco and a bit below Athearn. It's got its problems with detail, where they could have done some actual prototype studying instead of just copying Tyco for some of the obviously inaccurate parts, because really they did have plenty of engineering skill and talent in order to make a really good shell. I mean, as evidenced by the very clean plastic molding that they have here. It also has a pretty decent chassis to it, even if it is an all-plastic design and cheaply made. It's a smooth runner with some pretty good pulling power and a decently strong and efficient motor. And it's also got a couple nice touches, like the directional lighting, the see-through vents, the molded walkway tread. So really, Pemco, I'd say, was a company that had a lot of potential. And it really is their own fault that they went out of business, all thanks to their poor business practices and handling. If they had been a more honest company and handled their manufacturing and design better, I think they could have lasted a lot longer and even been a decently well-respected manufacturer in the model railroad market. If nothing else, though, we did get some good shells from the company, which have mostly been sold under the IHC name. So that is at least something. So if you come across a Pemco model and you're interested in getting it, I'd say it's worth picking up as long as it's a decent price, because they are easy to work on, and if you can get it tuned up nicely, I think you'll have yourself a nice smooth runner.